Welcome to T21Mom.
Hi friends, it's Mary, and this is episode 96 of the T21Mom podcast. And on today's episode, I am talking to a woman named Melissa Hart. She is an author, and obviously we're going to be talking about her latest book, which is called Daisy Woodworm Changes the World. And it's a book geared towards tweens, ages 8 to 14. But we also talk a lot about the sibling relationship as she grew up with a younger brother who has Down syndrome. And also one of the main characters in her book also has Down syndrome. And I really enjoyed talking to her and, seeing what it was like to grow up with a sibling who has Down syndrome in the 70s and 80s. I think we've come a long way since then. But at the same time, I think we still have a long ways to go and a lot of changes still to be made. But things are so different now with social media. It is so easy to find people and, and the challenges that her mom would have had raising, them and her brother who has Down syndrome. It was such a fun conversation, and I really enjoyed talking with her. So let's go have a listen. Today on the T21Mom podcast, I'm talking with author and journalist Melissa Hart, who also has a younger brother with Down syndrome. Welcome, Melissa.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm more than happy to have you on today, and I'm excited to hear about your book and about, your story of having a sibling with Down syndrome. So, before we get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. So when my brother was born, he's 5 years younger than I am. It was 1975, and I remember it as being pretty tumultuous. I guess it will come as no surprise to some listeners that the pediatrician told my parents to put him in an institution because he would never amount to anything. And my mom basically said, over my dead body, am I putting my son in an institution? And she pivoted, in an instant and learned everything she could about pediatric therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy, and had him in therapy from the time that he was an infant. And she raised him exactly like she raised my sister and me. And she let it be known to both of us that he was no different and we were not to treat him differently. And so I grew up with him being my husky little brother who woke me up at 5:30 on Saturday mornings wanting to play softball and enraged me at times. And we were also best friends. We would go to the park together all the time where we lived near Los Angeles. And we loved, this is so embarrassing, but we loved to play the guitar and sing old Peter, Paul, and Mary songs.
Oh, I love it. And I do hear that often that parents, other siblings, they say they didn't treat us any different, which I think is just so important. And how devastating though for your mom, them just, she's just given birth and basically they just already have everything mapped out for him, and saying he'll never amount to anything. It's just so devastating. And I can't even imagine what that would be like in 1975. It's so different now.
Yeah.
And your mom, like, I'm so thankful to parents like your mom who they're the ones who blaze the trail for us today.
Yeah, I do a lot of journalistic work around adults who have Down syndrome, particularly those who are, doing some pretty significant things in the fields of sports, athletics, and acting, and modeling, and entrepreneurship, and things like that. And I'd like to think that no pediatrician says that to parents these days.
I hope so. Like I recently had on a filmmaker, Oliver Bernier, and they happened to be filming while their son was born and they didn't know that he had Down syndrome, and just the reaction of the pediatrician, like, I mean, she hadn't even held the child yet, their son, and they told him he has Down syndrome, and it wasn't overly positive. So, and that wasn't that long ago. I think he's 8 now. I think
Oh,
so. Not a lot has changed. I mean, yes, it's better, but and I don't, we're not putting our kids in institutions, but
right.
I still think we have a long way to go on, how we deliver a diagnosis and celebrating our kids.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were 5 years apart. So are you the middle child or is your
No,
sister?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so and is Mark the youngest then?
He is the youngest. Yeah.
Okay.
He's the
Okay.
baby.
He's the baby. Well, I grew up with 3 brothers, so I know exactly what it's like to have a brother. So
Mhm.
I can imagine some of the shenanigans you guys got into. Now, so you were 5 when he was born. Like, do you recall when you realized, like, around what age you realized that he was different? And about how old were you when you understood what Down syndrome was?
I recall, I realized he was different when I was 5. When he was born, I have very vivid memories of my great grandmother being there right after my mother's delivery and agreeing with the pediatrician that he should go in an institution. Granted, this was my great grandmother, so
Mhm.
she came from a completely different era. But I think my dad was probably on the fence as well about whether or not to institutionalize him. And so I remember all the drama and the hushed discussion and the anger
Mm.
and and my mother just being enraged about these people wanting to take away her kid. I guess when did I realize Down syndrome as a genetic condition? Maybe maybe 8 or 9,
Mhm.
I would say, because my mom was a journalist as well
Okay.
and was very, very good at explaining things clearly. And so did a really good job of letting my sister and I know what Down syndrome is and the particular physical characteristics and developmental characteristics of our brother.
Oh, fantastic. I think I also knew at a young age what Down syndrome was. I mean, I just remember that my brothers always had a soccer exchange in with Seattle, and I remember asking the young boy that was at staying with us, who would have been younger because it was my younger brother, and I said, "Oh, how come your brother didn't join?" I can't remember exactly the situation, but he said, "Oh, he has Down syndrome." And I
Mhm.
said, "Oh, okay." And that was it. I knew what it was. And then but I remember seeing his brother out on the field and parents, playing with him. What I remember are fond memories of how he
Yeah.
was being treated. I remember they were giving him
Oh.
some candy and things like that. And I was actually kind of jealous because I didn't get any, but you know, but I don't remember anything negative at that time about it, but it
Mhm.
was just, that was probably really my first introduction, really. And I think I was about, yeah, maybe a little bit older, maybe 10. So yeah, that sounds like about, I think the age is that kids kind of start to understand, I think, what
I
Down
think
syndrome is.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
8, 9, 10. So recently, a friend of mine, she was talking about her younger son, and who I think is 5, and her older son has Down syndrome, and World Down Syndrome Day was coming up, and her younger son didn't want to talk about World Down Syndrome Day because some kids had teased him about his older brother being different.
Yeah.
With you being the older sibling, so the dynamics are slightly different. Like, did this ever happen to you? Did you ever encounter anything quite like this before?
I got pretty lucky in that I had really good, smart friends when I was growing up. And they really, they really just embraced Mark. Not so much the kids with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities at our school. Mark
Hmm.
and I went to different schools,
Hmm.
but those kids who went to our junior high and high schools who might have had Down syndrome or intellectual disabilities did not get the same grace. I remember distinctly one boy in particular at our high school, and kids just laughed at him, and they would ask him to break dance, and they would give him pennies, and he was just delighted with the attention and never realized that they were making fun of him.
Mhm.
And so I was pretty lucky, but other kids not so much. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's kind of what I hear too. So, would you have any, I guess, words of wisdom, from maybe from a sibling perspective to give to a parent for something like that? Because it was so heartbreaking when I heard that. And, like, what do you do?
I just, because I've done so much research into people with Down syndrome who are who are doing really positive things,
Mhm.
because there's so much out there, particularly on the internet now, highlighting these people who are just superb athletes and entrepreneurs, etc. I think the more exposure to role models like those young people and older people, like, Corky from Life Goes On,
Yeah.
the more exposure to media featuring people with Down syndrome, the better. I and so many other journalists are working so hard to to kind of put this demographic in the spotlight, because I think too often they've been sidelined, and
Oh,
I don't think that's doing anybody any favors.
oh, definitely. But that's so wonderful to hear because it's just such a battle, really. But
Yeah.
to hear that other people like yourself and other journalists are wanting to see this happen and also to celebrate our
Yes.
differences.
Oh
We're all
my gosh. Yeah.
different, and I think often with Down syndrome is that people just don't give our kids a chance,
Yeah.
and they just have this preconceived notion of what they're like, and it's generally always negative. It's not good. And so it's wonderful to, yeah, like you said, like to see our kids out in mainstream, in books and TV and film, sports, doing all these amazing things, because then people can appreciate our kids so much more.
And I'll say that I feel pretty optimistic. I think film in particular, and TV and books, of course, can really help change public perception. And I believe the live action film that just won the Oscar for Best Live Action was set in Ireland, and one of the main characters is a young man with Down syndrome. And it was a fantastic film, by the way. And
Yes, I
we've
do need
got,
to see it. I haven't seen it, but I
yeah.
I definitely have to see it. And
It's good.
it's good. Well, it's Oscar worthy, so it has to be good. So
Yes.
how fantastic is that? Like no one saw that coming, and then everyone sung happy birthday to him. It was amazing. Yeah, I think I was crying when I saw it.
Yeah. And we've got the new Woody Harrelson vehicle,
Yes.
Champions.
Mhm.
I have not seen Champions yet. I like what I've seen from the previews.
I've seen it and I loved it.
Oh, good. Okay.
It was a great movie,
Oh, I'm
and
so glad.
kudos to Woody Harrelson. I believe he also produced it.
Okay.
Yeah, so and it was just, and it's very funny, the film, and the characters are funny and a little bit outrageous. It was awesome to see. So I really enjoyed it. It was a great movie. I loved it.
The female character, Madison Tevlin, I think her name is. Isn't she Canadian? She's
I'm
doing
not
some
sure.
pretty remarkable things. She has a talk show, and she interviews people who look different. And I forget, she's got a super clever name. It's just so much fun to see the accomplishments that these people are making.
Yes, it is. I love seeing all the things in my Facebook feed
Yeah.
of what kids are doing these days.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. So you've written a book, Daisy Woodworm Changes the World. And are there similarities between you and the main character, Daisy?
Yeah. Uh, I was as big of a science nerd, although I loved botany when I was growing up. and I always had a million plants growing on my dresser. I don't think I was as insect obsessed as Daisy,
Hmm.
but definitely I was a junior high and high school runner and got into some mischief with the team. And really, a lot of the emotion behind Daisy's relationship with her brother Sorrel, or Squirrel, as she calls him, is directly based on my relationship with my brother, who, I don't know, he's always been obsessed with fashion. He is just a fashion plate. He is the most stylish man I know. And also, like Squirrel, has played every Special Olympic sport there is. And spoiler alert, had his heart broken on the dance floor by a longtime girlfriend who informed him that he was boring and left him
Oh,
for his best friend.
oh, geez, right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right in the book. So,
yeah.
geez, because there was a few quotes that sort of caught me early in the book that Daisy had said is about. She said she hated having to be so responsible, and everyone else's needs seemed so much more important than mine. Did you feel that often?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, yeah, my sister and I both grew up feeling that our needs were not particularly important. And I don't know. I responded to that by, getting straight A's and being an overachiever and palling around with my brother and helping to teach him to read. And that's just the way it was. I don't know if it's still that way in families. That would be interesting to find out.
Yeah, I don't know because my daughter's an only child, so
Okay.
I don't know, but I hear different things from different families. Basically, like what you said, is they're worried that their child with Down syndrome overshadows their other children, you know, and a lot of it, especially in the early years, there's a lot of therapy and a lot of
Yeah.
medical appointments. And sometimes the other siblings don't necessarily really understand that. They just feel like there's all this attention on this one sibling and they're
Right.
kind of left out a lot. Like, did you feel that way at all? Like,
No, I didn't feel left out. I had my own things going. I really looked to friends and journalism and running and theater and things like that as I was growing up, and honors classes. So I was very lucky.
yeah, and I think you just sort of touched on it is like make sure that your child has other things to do, like other
Yeah.
interests. So,
Yeah.
that they can feel involved in their own sort of circle, their own
Right.
world, right? And it's not just all about their sibling with Down syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
So, do you want to give a little brief synopsis of the book? I thought it was a really cute read. I really enjoyed it.
It's really fun to write. So, yeah, brief synopsis. The main character is Daisy Woodworm. That's her nickname.
Mhm.
A 14-year-old amateur entomologist and track and field star who gets a school project to change the world for the better
Mhm.
and decides to help her brother, who has Down syndrome, fulfill his dream of being a YouTube fashion influencer. The problem is their parents are super overprotective of him and they have forbid him to appear on social media. So, does Daisy break their trust and go behind their back and help Squirrel, or does she adhere to their very strict rules and flunk her project altogether?
Perfect. Yeah. And I thought it was also interesting in the book that you gave Daisy a lisp in the
Yes.
story. So almost like her own little disability as well.
Mhm.
And what was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, well, I have one, and you probably can't hear it right
Yeah.
now. It comes out when I do a lot of public speaking and when I'm really tired, or when I have been running long distance on asphalt too much. But I grew up with a slight lisp,
Mhm.
and I just thought it was interesting to give her that added challenge, because I was bullied to some degree in junior high, and I was looking for a reason that Daisy might be bullied. Because that's definitely one of the themes in the book is, how to cope with bullies and how to really be an ally, how to dive in there and put yourself on the line for somebody who's being marginalized and really help them to overpower bullies. So I wanted to explore that both as allies show up for Daisy and for her brother.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's a really lovely story. Now, I'm in lots of different Down syndrome groups, and like I'm hoping that we can sort of really explore, like obviously talk about your book, but also to explore the sibling
Yeah,
relationship.
I'd love that.
Yeah. And did you find growing up, and it's kind of it shows in your book as well, like I often hear, and it's also my experience, that their child with Down syndrome just gets so much attention. Often it's like, the medical stuff and therapy things, but often when they go out, it's almost like rock star. Like almost everywhere we go, somebody knows my daughter, which is great. She's an only child, so it doesn't really impact anyone else. But I do hear this from other parents that when they go out, there's all this attention shown to their child with Down syndrome, but it's like the other child almost doesn't exist, or they're kind of ignored. Did you experience this, or how did you handle this, or do you have any suggestions for parents on how they can handle
That is such a wonderful question with probably an unexpected answer. So when you think about it, my brother and I were growing up in the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And in that era, kids looked the other way, parents looked the other way, or kids stared and pointed, and parents smacked their hands down and said, "Don't stare."
Yeah.
At at the freak or whatever. So completely different. We didn't have people with Down syndrome in the media back then. We didn't have social media, but we had, what did we have? We didn't even have Rain Man at that point. We had Of Mice and Men, which was a representation of somebody with an intellectual disability. It was just villainy. So I remember when my brother got a little older, when we were in our 20s and 30s, he would come to visit me from California to Oregon. And even then, I remember we were in the grocery store once, and this little girl smiled at him, and he smiled back and went to give her a high five, and her mom dragged her away and said, "Don't talk to people like that."
Oh.
And then that night, I think we went to a bar, and it was Halloween, and all the college boys from the University of Oregon, were there, and they were kind of giving him sidelong glances and like, "What's wrong with him?" And then they started playing Michael Jackson, and he tore up that dance floor and won so much respect that night.
Oh, I love it.
All sorts of things, all sorts of reactions from the public. But no, when we were growing up, he was not treated like a rock star. He was marginalized. He was stared at. He was pointed at and laughed at when we went out. And then patronized in certain situations, like grocery store cashiers would patronize him, and he had a ready comment for all of them. Yes.
Do you care to share what that is?
Would you like me to?
Yeah.
So I've written about this. So they would patronize him. They would pat him on the head and say, "Oh, how are you, sweetheart? You poor thing." And he would look up with his big blue eyes and he would say, "I like your big boobs."
Oh, that is so awesome.
Self-advocacy at a young age.
Oh, that's priceless, and I love it. I love it. That is so great.
He had everybody's number.
And I like that you about the Michael Jackson, because just like Squirrel in the book, he loves Michael Jackson and can do his dance moves. So that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I kind of had to fight for that Michael Jackson because that guy.
Yeah,
he's not so popular in today's circles, but I know so many people with Down syndrome who adore Michael Jackson's music.
and he has fabulous music.
Yes.
So
right.
leave it at that, right? That
we got that in there. Yeah.
So one of the like kind of also about how their child with Down syndrome tends to get a lot of attention. Like we have World Down Syndrome Day,
Yeah.
so everyone kind of goes crazy that day, wearing their crazy socks and doing all sorts of great things, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. But a lot of parents have said, you know, their child with Down syndrome has their own special day. They also want to highlight their other kids, not just on their birthday, to have their own special day. Like, what's your thought on that? Like, I mean, obviously there wasn't World Down Syndrome Day because I think it didn't really start until the 90s, I think,
Yeah, I think
when
you're
you guys
right.
were growing up. But like, what if there was World Down Syndrome Day when you were growing up, like what would your thought be? Would you want to have your own special day or
Oh, that is a brilliant question. I need to think back on, wow. I guess as a sibling, I might have resented it.
Mhm.
I feel two ways about that. I might have resented it, or I might have been all in. Uh, wow. I can't go that far back in my memory.
But it also could be like maybe depending on your age too, right? I think if
You're
you're
right.
maybe late in your teens or later teens, you might be more
I
all
would have
in.
jumped all in. Absolutely. I would have organized it at my junior high and high school. I think when I was younger, I would have resented it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, because my mom was the kind of mom, if she threw a birthday party for one kid, the other kids each got a little present as well. So, gee, I'm trying to think of what kind of day I would have wanted in celebration of myself, and I really can't think of one.
But would you want something special for you, do you think?
I would have. I don't think I would have actually. No, I mean, now they have World Children's Day, right?
Okay, I didn't know, but
Yeah, there's a day for everything.
everything.
There's a day for hot dogs, you know? So, ah, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think as a younger kid, I would have resented it unless I had a mother's special day. And as a junior high and high school student, I probably would have helped to plan World Down Syndrome Day in my hometown. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, that's good to know, and I'm sure parents will appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, like, did you ever? Well, I guess it's hard to answer this because the times are a bit
Yeah.
different than now. But did you ever feel kind of overshadowed or left out, or that your accomplishments were overlooked? I know for us and for my daughter, and I know I speak for lots of parents, we celebrate big. Any milestone, doesn't matter how
Oh,
small, we celebrate big because they work so hard to get there. And I don't know if that was the same when your brother was growing up, but did you ever feel that your accomplishments were sort of overshadowed next to your brothers?
I guess I have to explain a little bit more about our family dynamic. That's probably why I'm stumbling a bit. So my parents got divorced when I was 9, or well, how old was I? Maybe I was 10, and my brother was 5. Um, and it was a very, very ugly divorce. It was fraught for a variety of reasons. We ended up not being allowed to live with our mom. We were only allowed to see her 2 weekends a month. We lived with
Mm,
our dad, who was already had a record for domestic abuse and continued abusing his next wife. And so, he and my stepmother were really busy with their own relationship, and any extra attention went to my brother. My mom was absolutely our champion, and I felt like my accomplishments where was concerned were big and
mhm.
celebrated, but I didn't
Okay.
get to live with her. And
Right.
so they were mostly, almost, I'd say, completely ignored by my dad and stepmother. I will speak for my sister and say the same went for her. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. And what about your brother?
Um, I wouldn't say celebrated. I would
Mm,
say it was just such a difficult situation.
mhm,
Here is this stepmother thrown into parenting 3 kids, one of whom has pretty significant needs in the early 80s.
mhm.
And, she did her best. My dad was largely out of the picture. My mom did a great job celebrating his accomplishments.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, that's great to hear.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, I
for
mean, and everyone's family dynamic is different. So I thank you for sharing that. Yeah, 'cause
sure. Sure.
So, and it's obvious from your book how much Daisy loves her brother and is
Yeah.
protective of him. Do you have any advice you could give parents who are struggling for that balance between their child with Down syndrome and their typical children?
Oh, that is such a good question. I mean, now you've got me thinking about how playful you could be as a parent in choosing a special day for your other kids that isn't World Down Syndrome Day. For instance, there's International Cat Lovers Day. Sure, you've got a child who loves cats. There really is a day for everything. There's National Snow Cone Day. If you've got a kid who loves snow cones, celebrate that. You could really be so playful in embracing all kids' accomplishments, interests, passions, that sort of thing. That doesn't really answer your question, though. I think, wow, I think if my parents could have a do-over, don't we all wish that?
Sometimes, yeah.
I think that it would have been wonderful if they had set aside, okay, I'll just be specific. If they had set aside 2 hours a week to spend with each of us as special one-on-one time, doing exactly what we wanted to do and deeply listening to us. That even just 2 hours a week of bonding time would have meant so much. It would have been so affirming. And, I only have an only child as well. My husband and I have one daughter, and she is actually adopted from the foster care system and has some pretty significant ADHD. And right away, knowing that when we adopted her, she was 19 months old and had significant early childhood neglect and trauma, we immediately came across that advice to each spend quality time week to week with her. And we've been doing it for the last 15 years. And so, I mean, if time is available, if you can, if you're not working 6 jobs, and if you are even just sitting on the couch and watching a movie that a child picked together can be so meaningful.
No, I think that's excellent advice that,
Yeah.
that I think we have to try to incorporate so that we can make it feel balanced for all of our kids. Because, like you said, when you're younger, you don't quite get all the nuances and the challenges that, there is going to be more time spent with the child with Down syndrome, just out of need, out of necessity. Like my daughter was a late walker. I spent so much time trying to get her to walking. I mean, she was 4. So, I can't imagine if I had another child, like what that would have been like at that time. It was probably the most emotional time for me in raising. She's 10 now, in raising her so far. Yeah, it was like the most mentally challenging and emotionally challenging time. So yes,
I think some visual cues that you can give kids as well. I think photos of all of the kids in their various latest accomplishments posted prominently around the house go a long way.
I love that.
Yeah, maybe even having, as we do, a big whiteboard on the refrigerator and just writing accomplishments like, congratulations so-and-so for the end you got in math, for learning to ride a bicycle, or for remembering to feed the dog. I just think it'd be so playful and have so much fun, affirming all of your kids.
Yes, that's awesome. I love that. That's great. Now, like we were chatting before, I think it's just so fantastic to see our kids getting center stage in like books like yours, TV shows and films. It's just so fantastic. And what is the name of your first book? Because you have your first book also has a character with Down syndrome, and is it also geared to sort of the tween age, which is what the book we're talking about today is geared towards?
Yeah, I actually have 5, maybe 6. I forget. 5 published books.
Okay, my apologies.
No, it's fine. 2 of them are memoir, and one of them has the hefty title "Better with Books: 500 Diverse Books to Ignite Empathy and Encourage Self-Acceptance in Tweens and Teens." And that book has an entire chapter devoted to 50 different novels and memoirs, which include kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Novels published in the last 12 years. And so people will want to check out all those titles. But my first middle grade novel for kids, say 5th through 8th grade, was Avenging the Owl, which is set in Eugene, Oregon, where I live, and directly based on the 8 years that I spent learning to rehabilitate and train injured and orphaned birds of prey. And one of the main characters ends up being the protagonist's best friend. And his name is Eric, and he is a 15-year-old boy with Down syndrome. And oddly, he is also obsessed with insects and all things Oregon flora and fauna, and really turns out to be the hero of the story in some ways.
Oh, fantastic. So we will definitely put the links in the show notes so people can check out those other books. Oh, that's so fantastic.
Thanks.
Oh, you're more than welcome. So what is your objective, or what is it that you want people to learn from having a main character with Down syndrome?
Oh my gosh. Overall, I want them to be inspired to reach out a hand in friendship. In allyship, yes, but in friendship to people who have this genetic condition. I want my books to show kids, not to teach them, but to show them in scenes and anecdotes and examples that people with Down syndrome make excellent, hilarious, creative friends. And I'm hoping that if parents and grandparents and other caregivers read my books to kids, they too will reach out a hand in friendship, either to their peers who have Down syndrome or their peers who have kids with Down syndrome. That's my overall goal. Let's stop the marginalization. Let's stop, making the kid break dance for pennies, and let's include them authentically in our circle of friends.
That's fantastic. I love that. It's awesome. I love hearing stuff like that. And I mean, I think you've already answered this, but did you draw a lot on your personal experiences growing up to create the characters of Daisy and Squirrel?
Yeah, quite a bit, actually. As I already told you, I drew on my poor brother's breakup on the dance floor, public breakup. I really did tell him, "Oh, sweetie, there are other fish in the sea." And he really did say, "But she was my fish." Yeah, I drew heavily on a lot of anecdotes. So there is a scene where some filmmakers are making a film on the main street. It's actually set in Ventura, California, where we grew up. And yes, he actually the star in question was actually Sandra Bullock. And my mother marched him to the front of the line to meet her, past all these other people. Said to the attending security guard, "She's been waiting all day." And so my brother got to sit next to Sandra Bullock for a long time, and she kissed him and whispered something in his ear that he has kept secret for decades. Lots of anecdotes directly from our lives together in the book.
Oh, that is a fantastic story. Oh, I love it. Oh, I think
yeah, she was not above that.
No, I mean, you only know what you see, but she does seem relatively down to earth, compared to, I guess, a lot of other celebrities, how they might be.
Yeah.
I think your brother sounds like he's a hoot. I think I'd love
he is so funny. Oh, yeah.
Oh, so that is so awesome to hear. I love hearing these stories. Now, like often, I mean, you kind of touched on it, and I know your upbringing was a little bit different, I guess, than, an intact family.
Yeah.
With the two parents and stuff. But I've often heard from other parents, like when they learn that their baby will be born with Down syndrome, or they learn at birth that their baby is going to have Down syndrome, they're really concerned how this is going to affect like the family dynamics. Do you have any thoughts on this? And like, especially as Mark is younger than you,
Mhm.
like, did it change sort of your family dynamics? I mean, I guess it kind of did because of the times.
Yeah.
What, yeah.
Yeah, it changed them. I guess in speculating about this, I think my father was probably much more on the side of institutionalizing him, and my mother, said, "Oh no, will not do that." And I think that really is where the cracks in their marriage started.
Hmm.
All I remember the last, I guess it was 5 years of their marriage, was just incessant fighting, and my dad just being more and more absent. So yes, I would say that his birth changed the family dynamics considerably. And my dad made no effort to educate himself, no effort to learn anything about Down syndrome. I guess, he was also very, very busy working. He worked 50 or 60 hours a week. Even so, you'd think you'd make an effort, right?
Hmm.
Yes. So, oh my gosh, I see these heartbreaking posts on Facebook support groups for families with a kid with Down syndrome. And I want to say, you don't have to be heartbroken. Educate yourself.
Hmm.
There are phenomenal role models out there, both in terms of caregivers and kids, babies with Down syndrome. Educate yourself, find those role models.
I think that is totally key because I do hear that too, is like, and it's usually the mothers lamenting about the fathers, and
Yeah.
generally like they're parting ways or what have you. But if the
Yeah.
father hasn't really, or their partner has not, made any kind of real effort on learning about Down syndrome, because maybe they're still in denial. I mean, I don't know
Mhm.
the reasons, but I think that is key. Is education is key. We need
Oh
to,
gosh.
because you're scared of. I've always believed you're scared of what you don't know,
Yeah.
and if you and I knew nothing about Down syndrome when I learned that my daughter Ainsley was going to have Down syndrome. So what did I do? I started
Yeah.
reading. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an expert, but I certainly know more than just the general person for sure. But I'm an expert on my daughter.
Yeah.
So, when we go to appointments and things like that, that's again where you have to be an advocate and you have to know your child. And, but yeah, and I always believe like knowledge is power, because that's
I
what's going to get you further.
totally agree. And there is such a wealth of information out there now, and you can get it, whatever your learning style is. If you do well with podcasts, obviously there are podcasts, books, movies, TV. There's just so many ways to get this information at this point.
Yes, because I can only imagine what it was like for your mom, because
Yeah,
there would be, I would guess, almost nothing. Like,
almost nothing.
pretty
Yeah.
much, there probably were no support groups. There certainly wasn't social media. How did you find your people?
Yeah.
Like, I can't even imagine. And like I said earlier, is I'm so grateful to parents like your mom who said yes to taking their child home and to
Yeah.
raising their child like their other children,
Yeah.
and making it easier for us now. I mean, it's still hard now, so I can only imagine what it was like back then, but I know that it's easier now than when it was for your mom.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I am so grateful for the parents who have gone ahead of me and us, because we are where we are now because of parents like your mom.
Mm,
You know,
it's
I mean,
amazing.
yeah, and it's so grateful. And now with social media, just things are so much easier. It's so much easier to find people. It's so much easier to find information. I'm so grateful for all the people that I have gotten to know on this journey. Like, it's amazing. And I without that extra chromosome, like none of this would have happened, right? I wouldn't know all these people. I wouldn't have been having these experiences. And I think we all can say that it's, changed us and enriched
Yeah.
us and shaped us in ways that we
And
probably didn't expect.
I guess that's the other thing that I would love to say to anybody who doesn't know is there is such a vibrant, fun, creative community, available to all of us you know, who have a person with Down syndrome in our life. It's
Mhm.
we've got your back.
Yes, that is so true.
Yeah.
That's what I see time and time again. So, and it makes me feel less nervous of what the future is, right? You know,
Yeah.
there's people that are there to help me or to guide me, to,
Yeah.
support me, because it makes such a difference. And again, like your mom, I'm sure it was so isolating. I mean, I feel isolated a lot of the time, but I can only imagine what it was like for her. And so
Yeah.
kudos to her,
Yeah.
really. Now, you're an adult, obviously, and a lot of parents, like I hear about this often, they're really concerned about their typical children having to become the caregivers for their child with Down syndrome. So what's your thoughts on that? I mean, but I also hear that there's in families there's kids fighting over who's going to look after their sibling with Down syndrome when their parents are no longer able to. Like what's your thoughts on that?
I can only speak from my direct experience. I absolutely loved being a caregiver. I loved getting to, well, this wasn't so much caregiving as just hanging out with my kid brother when we would go to the park or play the Peter, Paul, and Mary songs. But I absolutely adored teaching him to read and write.
Hmm.
Um, I loved getting to interact with him. As he grew older, I loved teaching him to hike and to snowshoe and all of that. My sister absolutely did not love any of that, had no desire to be a caregiver to him, resented him, didn't want anything to do with him. So I think it really depends on the kid and uh what they're interested in and what their temperament is. I will say that, in my research, I've come across so many siblings who absolutely adore being caregivers and partners with their siblings who have Down syndrome. I'm thinking of particularly kids who are, CEOs of their own companies,
Hmm.
or kids who have Instagram, siblings who have Instagram accounts together or TikTok
Hmm.
accounts together.
Yeah.
And these kids are having a blast. I mean, on both sides.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I love seeing all those
Yeah.
videos. But how do you feel about though when you both become adults? Like about, your parents split and your dad
Mhm.
remarried and stuff. And I don't know what your brother's situation is now, but like I think a lot of parents today they worry about like who's going to look after their
Yes.
child.
Yes.
And so kind of like how do you feel that as being a sibling?
Every parent that I've ever met who has a child with any sort of intellectual disability worries about, okay, what is going to happen to this child? Which sibling is going to take care of them? This has been an incredibly fraught situation in my family's life over the last 4 years. My mom passed away 4 years ago, and she did not make it clear in her will what she wanted to have happen to my younger brother.
Hmm.
There's a variety of reasons that I think she didn't make it clear. Suffice to say that on her deathbed, she said to me, I would like you to take him, which, I had known since I was 16 years old. That's just what all three of my parents had asked me to do, and I was fine with that.
Hmm.
But her partner had vastly different ideas. And so he is currently living in a group home thousands of miles away from me, and there is nothing I can do about it. And so I guess I'll use this opportunity of speaking from my absolute heartbreak to tell your listeners to make a will
Hmm.
ASAP and make it very clear what you wish to happen, because what is happening to my brother right now at age 47 is absolutely tragic. So,
Oh, I am so
yeah.
sorry to hear that.
Yep. Yeah. Me
Oh,
too. And there's nothing I can do. Went to court, did all the things. If you don't put it in your will what you want to have happen, bad things can happen.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Holy, you've left me a little bit speechless there because that's really
So,
heartbreaking to hear.
yeah, it is. I'm trying to figure out how to write about it. It's, I think it might be a couple more years before I can tackle that
Mhm.
subject.
Yeah. I mean, because it's heartbreaking because you were willing.
Yes. Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the age of 16.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I used to teach special education, so I have a pretty good sense of what he needed as a middle-aged adult. So,
Mm.
yeah.
But most excellent advice. And yeah, about having a will, because like I'm a single mom by choice. I do have a partner now, but that was my biggest fear, is what if something happens to me and I don't have a will, what's going to happen to my daughter? I
Yeah.
didn't, I'm confident that my family wouldn't just let her go into foster care, but if you don't have anything in writing, there really is no guarantee.
Yeah.
So, and then I chatted with my family and with my younger brother, and him and his wife agreed that
Mhm.
they would take her on. But like the lawyer asked me lots of questions that I hadn't even thought about. Like what
Yeah.
happens if he dies and his wife is still alive, or what happens
Right.
if they divorce, like kind of like
Right.
what happened with your parents, and things that I hadn't thought of. So,
Yep.
but it gives you, food for thought, because it is important that we have to have some kind of map for our children after we're gone.
Have to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that, but I've been love reading about, I guess, kind of Mark, but Squirrel in your book, about like, just such a fantastic character. I've really enjoyed reading about him in your book. And what do you think, in your opinion, is like one of the greatest life lessons in having a sibling with Down syndrome? Like, how has he impacted you or changed you?
Oh, I love that question. I mean, just in so many ways. From the moment he appeared when I was 5 years old, I think I just understood that people can look different. People can act different, and they're all humans worthy of respect and compassion and a good time. I mean, we just had such a good time when we were growing up. I would make him dress up like a girl and play charm school, and full makeup and the bra and everything. And so fondly still. I, and so I just say, growing up my entire life, I've had this gift because of my brother of not pointing and staring or shying away, but just looking people in the eye and saying, "Hi, let's be friends. Tell me your story." Yeah, and I've passed it on to my kid, and I think I've taught my husband, and hopefully my writing is advocacy, and hopefully it's inspiring people to not be ableist, to
Yeah.
reach out and befriend people and be respectful and loving. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of really nailed it for me, because I I think is it allowed me to, I mean, I think I've always been an empathetic person, but I think now it's to a greater sense. And and really being aware of people with differences.
Yeah.
I just remember one day my daughter was very little. We were at the park and there was a man there who was kind of just, I guess, they're just enjoying the day. He was kind of leaning against the bathroom, but he had a very significant facial disfiguration, like he must have been in an accident or something. And but he was just kind of away from all the action. But I remember I looked right at him and I
Mhm.
smiled, and he smiled back, because I am sure, like you had talked about earlier, that people like have always just looked away from him,
Yeah.
never acknowledged him, just to like look in his eyes and
Yeah.
just say hi, because for some people that's a big deal, that someone notices them, that they're, that they are being seen, not for the wrong reasons, but they're being seen and feeling valid. And I've always remembered that. And my daughter was very young at the time, but because that's how I felt with my daughter in the first few years, that nobody saw us, people looked away at us. I could see the stares in the stores, or the looks. And and I've talked about it on other podcasts, where no one would talk to us at the baby groups. I remember
Oh.
distinctly a woman at the Mother Goose group, when I came in, I was late and I sat in the chair right at the door. she actually got up and moved. And I've always remembered that. And and nobody talked to me at that. And finally, they eventually did when Ainsley laughed during a song, and none of the other kids laughed except Ainsley. And there was an audible gasp when she did. And
it's just astonishing.
Yeah, right. And that legitimately happened to me. And like, I didn't want to go, but she loved the music, so I kept going. And it was really hard. And, and I'm sure I'm not alone in these experiences. And, and I still feel it at times, isolation and being left out of things and so on, so it's, yeah, I think a lot of us, we want to be seen, and we want our child to be seen. And just like in your story, Squirrel being seen and being validated for, who he is and things. So, yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry that happened just 10 years ago.
Well, I'm trying to think. She might have been 1 or 2. So yeah, 8, 9 years ago. Yeah. Right. Like, a lot of things haven't changed, but I'm hopeful. I have to be hopeful that things will.
I guess what enrages me about that is that we're talking about largely preconceptions based on facial characteristics. So somebody has an extra fold of fold under their eye, or their nose looks a bit different, or their neck is shorter. Why would you ostracize somebody for something like that? That is just heinous.
And I remember I've talked to Ainsley's class more when she was younger around World Down Syndrome Day, and pointing out the similarities. Like, she has blue eyes like you, brown eyes like you, and don't you love pasta? Yes, Ainsley loves pasta too. Do you like swimming? Yeah, Ainsley loves that too. Like, to make them realize that just because she might be a little bit different, she still loves a lot of the same things that you do.
Oh, thank goodness. That's a wonderful approach.
Oh, thank you. I mean, like, you just do what you need to do.
I see, though, that we have so much more work to do.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Like, I do think we've come a long way since your brother, Mark, was born, but we still have a long way to go.
Right? Long way. Yeah, absolutely.
But we're getting there. It's slowly, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
I have to say, I really enjoyed your book, Daisy Woodworm Changes the World. Great title. And I learned a lot about the sibling relationship, and also, like you talked about bugs. I thought, wow, I was wondering if you yourself was into that, but
I am nature obsessed.
That's awesome. And I found it to be a really great read for kids between ages 8 to 14. I was kind of curious if you chose that age group to write such a book for, or did it just sort of happen?
I really like that age group. So we have here in Oregon Battle of the Books, and I think there's probably book battles maybe across the states, maybe into Canada. And, where a state will choose 16 titles, and schools from around the state will read those and then compete in trivia contests based on those books. I was a coach when my daughter was doing Battle of the Books, and in middle school, and I just fell in love with middle schoolers. They were sweet and hilarious and passionate, and none of them had phones yet, so they were attentive and engaged. And I just love writing for this age group, and when I write for this age group, then I get invited into their classrooms and to do library presentations, and then I get to be with them in person or on Zoom. And it's just such a pleasure to be around them. I know people say horrible things about middle schoolers and hormones and all of that, but I find them absolutely delightful.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so do you think you're going to have any more books with similar characters in them?
I do. I'm working on a sequel to Daisy right now.
I was just going to ask. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. I
can't say anything too much about it, except that Squirrel is in it, and one of the minor characters is the protagonist of this one. And it will explore themes of PTSD and homelessness.
Interesting.
And then I'm working on a super top secret nonfiction book directly related to people with Down syndrome, for middle school audiences, and my agent is shopping it around right now, and I am dying to tell you about it, and I'm not allowed to.
Okay. Well, when is that going to be out?
It should be out, oh gosh, it depends on the publisher, by the end of 2024 or the beginning of 2025, and you and your daughter are the perfect audience, so I'll make sure you get a copy.
Oh, I would love that. And then we can chat again when that
Hey,
comes
that's
out.
great. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. So, where can people find your books?
Oh, they can find them everywhere. They're available all over the place, in-person bookstores, online bookstores, libraries all over the place, through my website, which is melissahart.com.
Okay.
1L, 2 S's, HART. Don't get me confused with Melissa Joan Hart from Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Okay.
I am not her, though I do sometimes get her fan mail.
Oh, that's funny.
My books all over the place. And if you go to my website, you can read a lot of my published essays, some of which talk about my brother as well.
Oh, fantastic. Like I said, we'll definitely put all that in the show notes, and we'll put a link for somewhere for people to get your books, because I think it's a great read, especially for that audience. And I really enjoyed it. I don't think you need to be a young kid. I quite enjoyed the book, and I thought it was really awesome to read about the relationship between siblings, like with one having Down syndrome. So I thought it was wonderful. And I think parents can read it to sort of get kind of an idea of what it's like for their kids to have a sibling with Down syndrome.
I hope so. That's a wonderful idea. I hope that does give parents an idea. Thank you.
Oh, yes, I think for sure, because there is certainly different nuances throughout the book that I wouldn't have thought of. Like, because again, I don't have another child. It's just my one daughter. So, I think parents would appreciate that, like to learn, from hearing from the siblings' point of view without necessarily having to ask their child, because some kids aren't going to be as forthcoming, I think, to explain how they might feel about having a sibling.
Yeah. And honestly, I am not one of those unapproachable authors. If your listeners have questions about what, the sibling relationship or the book, or they need resources, just email me. You can email me through my website. I will reply. I love meeting new people in this community, so have at it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing about your books and sharing about the sibling perspective and what it's really like to have a sibling with Down syndrome.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me, and my best to you and your daughter.
Oh, thank you so much. And to you and hopefully with your brother as well.
Yeah, got to give him a call right now.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.
After I stopped recording, Melissa and I actually continued talking, and she gave permission for me to share this. During our conversation, she talked about how when her parents divorced, that they were sent to live with her dad, who was a known abuser and continued to abuse his second wife, and really, for the most part, wasn't there for them. He worked very long hours and, in the early years, even wanted to put their brother in an institution when he was born. And the reason that they were sent to live with their dad as opposed to live with her mom is because when they divorced, her mom had fallen in love with another woman. And so it was deemed that it was more appropriate for them to go live with their dad, who, from what Melissa told me, was an ill-equipped parent and not the better parent. And I think this would have been about 1980. I'm hoping that wouldn't happen now. I don't think it would. Perhaps some of the listeners, you might enlighten me if this would happen where you live. I'm very confident where I live, this wouldn't happen. But that just shows that, back then the courts weren't doing what was in the best interest of the kids. They couldn't see what was better for the children, which would have been to live with their mom, who was a strong advocate for them, a strong advocate for Melissa's brother. They sent them to live with her dad, who, as Melissa said, was an abuser. He wasn't really around much. He worked very long hours and, had different feelings about her brother. When he was born, wanting him to be institutionalized. I don't know how much that changed as they got older, but that is a real tragedy. And what she also shared with me, because one of the minor characters in her book has two moms, and her book is being banned. It's being banned in schools. It's being banned in the library. So please, I think it's important to show that there are different types of families out there. I'm a different type of family. I'm a single mom by choice. I remember one day, and Ainsley wasn't very old. I think maybe grade 1 or kindergarten. Some kids, and I don't know why, asked me if Ainsley had a dad. And that took me by surprise because I was wondering why they were asking that, because every child has a dad. And I kind of stuttered trying to answer that because Dennis is like her dad. But there are lots of different families out there. There are the typical families, a mom and dad. There are two mom families. There are single mom and dad families. There's two dad families. So please support Melissa's book, not just for our kids, but for the diversity of everyone. Support it, ask for it at your schools, ask for it in the library so we can support diversity, not just for our kids, but for the different types of families that are out there, and they're everywhere. And a couple of my takeaways from this episode is, Melissa talked a lot about, the more exposure to media featuring people with Down syndrome, the better. And I love this. Like, we are seeing our kids out there more. We are seeing them in commercials. We're seeing them in ads. We're seeing them on TV, and, we're seeing them in books. And I've always been a big believer, you're often scared of what you don't know. And if you've never met someone with Down syndrome, or you don't know anybody with Down syndrome, chances are you're not going to be as accepting. You might even be a little bit scared of them because you just don't know. But the more we can get our kids out there, I think the greater chance we have of them being accepted and for people to include them. And she also talked about how, number 2, I want my books to show kids, not to just teach them, but to show them in scenes and anecdotes and examples that people with Down syndrome make excellent, hilarious, creative friends. And I think that is so wonderful. And, and I've been really struggling with this with Ainsley at school. She's got a couple, nice friends, and I really hope that will continue. And, and I guess we just have to wait and see. And number 3 is, like Melissa talked about, let's include them authentically in our circle of friends, not just, to be the hero. We want our kids to be authentically accepted and as authentic friends. And I think that's something that we all want for our kids. And number 5, and I just loved this, Sandra Bullock. We all know who she is. She is a major star. How Melissa's brother waited in line to see her, and that she kissed him and whispered something in his ear that to this day he has never shared with anyone. These experiences can happen for our kids, and it's amazing. Just go out there, grab these opportunities, and just run with it. You never know where it's going to take you. And, and finally, that there is such a vibrant, fun, creative community available to all of us who have a person with Down syndrome in our life. I think we can all agree on that. And I just really loved how Melissa, said that. And, it's like we all kind of need to have someone with Down syndrome in our life, right? Like, I really do believe that, because I know for me that Ainsley has just really opened my eyes up to so many things that I otherwise would never have known about. So thanks for listening to the T21Mom podcast. And as always, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at info@t21mom.com, or you can find me on Facebook at T21Mom. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter at Trisomy21Mama. Tell me your stories, what's going on in your life, what's important to you. I would love to hear your suggestions for future episodes, and I'll leave me a little review so we become more searchable for others in the Down syndrome community. And I'll give you a little shout out on the show. And let your friends know about the podcast, because word of mouth is a powerful thing. So keep on loving on your rockin' kiddos, and I'll see you next time.